Well, welcome to the very first inaugural episode of the M3 podcast. Good to be with you, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Good to be with you. I'm good, thanks.
This has been in the works for several years, from what I understand. I'm super excited. It's an honor to be with you today talking about this. What our goal is with this show is to really help you live your life on mission. We're coming off of the M3 conference, Mobilizing Medicine and Missions. But the goal with this podcast really is to help people throughout their lives, wherever God has you in the season of life you're in right now, whether you're serving in Africa or whether you feel like right now the season is, I need to be at home here in the United States or in Europe, wherever you're serving. We want to help you live life on mission. We are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which the Father prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So I wanted to start this first episode. I know the story well, but I think a lot of people over the years have not heard the story of the start of M3. Okay. You were serving as a surgeon, very successful practice in, was it Little Rock, Arkansas? And God kind of redirected your call.
Yeah, that's right.
So tell me a little bit about that and tell the folks listening.
Yeah, well, listen, for many years, for almost 20 years, I practiced general and vascular surgery in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I was very successful in the practice, very at home with my partners, just great partners. Had a great church there. We were just doing what we felt like God called us to do. And, Joel, I'll say this right off the bat, because we're talking about transitioning to mission, but I felt like my ministry there in Little Rock was just as much as a ministry as it is now, what I'm doing overseas in Africa, because I felt like God had this mantle and this anointing and this calling on my life to help sick people. And that's exactly what we were doing. But we felt like we would do that for the next 20 or 30 years, just felt comfortable with it. But in 1996 or 7, we begin to get this unrest. My wife, Jennifer, and I begin to get this unrest inside. It's like surgery wasn't quite as satisfying as it was before. And we really didn't know what it was, but I had this overwhelming impression that I was supposed to do something different with the second half of my life. And that was an odd thought. But anyway, I kept thinking I'm supposed to do something different. We kept thinking that. And for a couple of years, we didn't, God didn't speak to us. We prayed, we read our Bible, we did all the things, listened to the voice of Jesus, and there was nothing. And it was uncomfortable. And I liken it to the fact it's like the children of Israel. They were led by the pillar of fire and the cloud. But it's like the pillar and cloud had lifted, but it didn't move. We felt like the anointing to do surgery and practice surgery was leaving, but we didn't know where to go. And one of the things my dad taught me, and I think is a real good principle to think about, is keep doing the last thing Jesus told you to do until he clearly tells you the next thing to do. So we just kept doing what we were doing. And my dad had been suffering some from kidney failure, and he was on dialysis and had some problems with his heart. And fairly unexpectedly, in January of 1999, he passed away. So I canceled my surgery, obviously, came down to the memorial service. And, we were grieving as a family, and we went through that whole process, or began going through the process. But unbeknownst to us, driving home from the memorial service, and Joel, I can tell you, US 59 at the Cleveland exit, I heard this voice, give up your practice, move to Houston and help however you're needed. It made absolutely no sense to my type A surgeon mind, give up your practice, move to Houston and help. That's not a very specific job description, but it made perfect sense to my heart. I knew this was the next step that God had called us to do. And so, we made the decision. We thought, another good principle, we didn't just immediately do it. We prayed about it. We thought about it. We really just prayed and took some time. And for a couple of weeks, we didn't mention it to anybody because it was such a big change. We just didn't mention it to anybody. But finally, I got the nerve up to call my sister, Lisa, who lives here in town. And I called her, and I remember I was standing outside in the driveway by the basketball goal, and I was talking to Lisa, and I said, Lisa, here's the deal. And I told her the whole story. I felt like God spoke to me. He said, give up my practice, move to Houston, and help you guys at the church. She was at the church. And she said something that I'll never forget. She said, Paul, are you sure God spoke to you? And I said, I'm absolutely 100%. She said, then it's easy. I said, what? She said, you can either obey or you can disobey. And our family always obeys. And that just helped tip me over to think, you know what, I can do this. We can do this. We gradually began telling more and more people. And it wasn't received well by everyone. My partners kind of thought I was having a midlife crisis but I tell everybody I didn't have Harley Davidson and a gold chain around my neck. But
Can't you just get a motorcycle?
that's right. That's right. But anyway, our pastors really cautioned me and told me to be careful. And I appreciated that counsel we did. But this prompting persisted. And in July of 1999, we made our move to Houston.
That makes me think, over the years, I've coached a lot of executives and leaders that they're kind of in a stage of life where everything's good.
Yeah.
They say, life's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I love my job. I love my family. I'm good at what I do. I've kind of reached the top of the ladder, but I know there's something else in me that I'm called to do. They don't necessarily know what it is.
Yeah.
Makes me think there's a verse in 2 Corinthians 5:13. Paul says this. He says, if we're out of our mind, it's for God. If we're in our right mind, it's for you.
Yeah.
Because Christ's love compels us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was writing something about that word compels. And it's so interesting because one of the verses, one translation says, Christ's love constrains us.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the word, you go, well, that seems like opposites. Compel is to push forward, constrain is to hold back. But the real sense of the word is to come and wrap your hands and squeeze you.
Oh, wow.
But man, isn't that what so many people feel? You go, life's good. I don't have anything to complain about. I'm happy with where I am. But when God has put something in your heart like that, I think it's almost a divine discontentment that God puts in us.
Beautiful way to describe it.
Where he says, yeah, you've done a lot and that's great, but I've got even more for you. It's exceedingly abundantly far above all you could ever ask or think according to my power at work in you. It's so interesting to hear that. So when you felt that, was it tempting to just kind of jump at the first thing that came along, or did you know, we better wait and hold off? How did you manage that?
During those 2 years where we weren't sure what to do, there were a lot of options for us to do something else, but none of them felt like it was God speaking to us. And I think another principle from my story, Joel, at least it seems a principle to me, is that it's really important to be able to hear the voice of Jesus at these critical destiny moments in our lives. God doesn't speak to me often. In the right sense, he'll prompt me inside, but I'm talking about these big, directional changes in our life. We have to be able to hear the voice of Jesus. And the fact is the Holy Spirit's inside of every believer. And you know what Jesus said, my sheep know my voice, but the voice doesn't come to your brain. The voice comes to your heart, to your spirit. And so I think it's just really critical that, we always are monitoring our spirit to see, is God saying anything to me? Is he speaking anything to me?
So when you came back here, I think it's an interesting thing. A lot of times people fall into what they're doing and find out it's what they really wanted, but they didn't know it at the time. Yeah. What was it like, that transition time when you came back here? Did it feel weird? Was it?
It was so weird. And the thing about it is I was going from what I was really good at to something that was totally new for me. Doing surgery and taking care of people and dealing with crisis and things like that is different than doing pastoral ministry. Is a lot different than doing pastoral ministry at the church. And plus, I'd never spoken in front of anybody. The first time I ever spoke in front of anybody was at my dad's memorial service.
Really?
And so that was a big transition. And so I wouldn't say that the transition was easy. I would say that for a couple of years there, it was difficult for both of us.
Did it feel in some ways like starting over?
It did. Yeah. It did. I used to tell everybody that the people in Lakewood don't know where I came from, and the people in Little Rock don't know where I have come to. So I felt like kind of a, in between worlds. But, God he was faithful, and it didn't take me long to get my stride there. Lakewood, and it was a critical time. If you know the history of our church, Joel had just taken the pastoral ministry, and he wasn't able to be at the church a lot of the time. My sister Lisa, who was overseeing a lot of the ministries, had just had adopted twin babies. So I felt like God moved me at a critical time in the life of the church.
So this is a weird question, but I feel like God wastes nothing. Mm-hmm. What skills that you learned as a surgeon have transferred into working as a church? And then I want to jump into what you're doing now with the surgery and stuff. Like, what did you find they transferred, or was it like a whole new learning curve?
A lot of ways it's a new learning curve, but I can tell you, when you deal with people in surgery, you're dealing with people many times in crisis. Mm. And so that's not really much different than some of the pastoral ministry. So I feel like God wired me to run to those that are hurting. And I felt like that was a really good character trait or a bent of my heart in pastoral ministry.
Well, and that has been a real drive of this church since your father was running the place.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you came back here, and then what led to what you're doing now?
Yeah. So after a few years here, I thought had given up surgery forever. It was like I put my Isaac on the altar and it was done and I walked away. But a few years after that, after we moved here, someone invited us to go on a missions trip with us to Africa. And we went and they said, could you bring your operating loops with you, the glasses I wear in surgery, because a plastic surgeon's going to be there. And he wanted somebody to help him with his cases. And I said, sure, I put him in. It had been several years since I'd operated. Well, Joel, I got there. And it's like my skills had never left me. It was like I'm not bragging, I was just as good as I was when I had done my last operation. And I was blown away by that. And so not long after that, I met a gentleman by the name of Dick Furman who invited me to go to a Christian mission hospital. I had no idea you could use your gifts and talents in surgery, working in surgery at a Christian mission hospital. And that kind of birthed what we're doing now.
So kind of explain what does the year look like for you? Because we do the conference every February, the third week of February. It's third weekend of February, I think, right? Yeah. And then usually right after that, you jet out and you're in Africa. What did that look like for you?
Well, for years, Jennifer and myself and 4 of our kids were able to go. And as the kids got older now, I pretty much go by myself. Jen comes to join me some. But what usually I do is right after the M3 conference, I'll leave for 3.5 months, sometimes 4 months. And what I do, Joel, is I go relieve missionary surgeons at Christian mission hospitals so that they can have a break. And I feel like that's the niche, that's the area that God's kind of directed me. And so I'll spend 3 or 4 months a year doing that and have been for it's going to be the 18th year this year.
How did you figure that out? Was there a job posting that said need somebody to fill in for?
The gentleman, Dick Furman, is the one that introduced me to this idea. And they placed me at a place called Tenwick Mission Hospital in Kenya for 5 or 6 years. And that's where I learned African surgery. So I just saw God direct my steps there and kind of teach me what I'm doing now.
Okay. So I hear this a lot with people that end up on the mission field, kind of the gateway drug, the short-term trip. What was that first trip like you said, did you bring the whole family for that first trip?
We brought 3 kids and my wife. Yeah.
Did you get some pushback on that from people going, what are you doing bringing your kids to Africa?
A little, but we just felt like God was calling us to do something uncomfortable. And I think that's a point that sometimes God calls us to get out of our comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And so no, we felt it was God calling us. It was a little uncomfortable. We had no hesitation taking the children.
So the discomfort of it, obviously something outweighed that enough where you said, I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
What did navigating that look like?
I just realized the impact that you can have over there. Mm-hmm. And I also realized with my dad being a pastor, I know how hard it is to pastor and how hard it is not to have a break. And to be able to provide a break for some of these surgeons that work day in and day out for 12 months of the year, to give them a break, it's just very rewarding. And then the other thing is taking care of people who have no ability to get care or have no ability to pay you back is just a very rewarding experience.
It's interesting you use the word rewards. I think about that verse where it says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. He who comes to God must believe that he is, and he rewards those who seek him.
Yeah.
There are real benefits. We often talk about the sacrifice and the suffering of serving Jesus, but there's also these kind of intangible benefits, these sense of fulfillment, sense of purpose, calling that sometimes you don't even realize they're available to you until you step out in obedience to this prompting to kind of like Abraham, go to where I'm going to show you. I'm not going to tell you where the final destination is. What's that been like for you?
I would say that there is a deep soul satisfaction when you're listening and obeying the voice of Jesus. And I just say that just because that's my life. I've just listened, I obeyed. It's not hard. And, I'll be 70 years old this year. It's a very satisfying place to live, knowing that you're doing what you feel like God's called you to do. So I would say that satisfaction would be a word that I would use, a deep sense of soul satisfaction.
So we got a few minutes left. I want to ask you this question. You've got somebody that's listening right now and they're saying, I kind of feel like Dr. Paul felt there. He's like, I think there's something else in me. I feel that pushing out. What steps would you encourage them to take right now? I mean, one of the things I say oftentimes is just start paying attention. Yeah. Start paying attention to what opportunities God's going to open. Should we be pushing on doors or should you just wait for the doors to swing open? What's your take on that?
I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I think you can do both. I think the most important thing, as I said earlier, is just be prayerful and be searching and sensitive to what God's saying to your spirit. I'd say that's the most important thing. But if you feel like God's wanting you to do something different, try some things and see what you're good at, see what you're not good at, see where you feel. What's the movie? Feel the pleasure of God when I run.
It's a fire.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
And find out if you're doing something that gives you pleasure, because I can tell you, I can go work in children's ministry until the cows come home. I don't have pleasure in doing that. That's not what God wired me to do. Other people, that's exactly what God's wired them to do. So I would just say, find something that brings you satisfaction on the inside. Let me say one other thing. I think this is important too. For people contemplating kind of a midlife change or a big change. I read this book one time, Joel. It's called Halftime.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that book because it says this. It says, it doesn't matter how you play in a football game. It doesn't matter how you play the first half. You win or lose by how you play in the second half. And that is in no way meaning that you shouldn't be, godly and conscientious in the first half of your life. But, sometimes I feel like, around 40 years of age, God begins to speak to us about new and different things. And so if that's you, I would just say that, sometimes when you do stuff for God, you have to get out of your comfort level and be willing to step out and do some things that may be new and different for you, things that may be hard, because you never know. That may be the second half of your life that how you're going to win for Jesus as in what He's called you to do.
And it is interesting how I've seen over and over again where some people step out and they feel like maybe it's something completely new, but God has used everything that's happened to you up to that point. He's just that good at what He does, all powerful. He works all things together for the good of those who love Him, for those who are called according to His purpose. So it would be the most natural thing that He would begin to use those things you may have thought, oh, I guess I'll never use those again.
Yeah.
And He brings it back full circle to see that.
I tell everybody, it's like, when Isaac got off that altar, it was different. He was different, I'm sure. And when God gave me surgery back, putting it on the altar, it was different. It was just deeply satisfying.
Man, that's great. Well, we are so grateful that you guys have tuned in for this first episode. Lots more to come. And thanks for joining us.